Country Burr, a short story for Halloween by Gary Bills. First published, the Lothlorien Poetry Journal. Penshaw Vicarage, Herefordshire, November the 4th, 1876. My dear old friend, in the love and service of Christ, you ask me how I could contemplate leaving our church and embracing instead the sacraments of Rome. Why do you express surprise in your letter? You and I have ever been High Church since our days together at Oxford, and for me it is a natural progression as my time in this world draws to a likely close. I shudder at my words, and hesitate, and indeed I am truly sorry if I put you to the torture like this, but upon this reflection concerning my dwindling prospects, I believe it is only wise to look to the Holy See for solace and salvation. Indeed, there must be powers on this earth, and by this I mean benign forces raising the banners of grace, and these must stand firm against the onslaughts of the devil. You must comprehend I have encountered the agents of malice and shadow. They are real, and they have cursed me with the relentless affliction of consumption. Our own church offers no consolation. Our bishop does not believe in curses, and so he refuses to lift a potent curse, even if he might. You asked me about my meeting with the Right Reverend. Well, as he had troubled himself to visit an ailing colleague, I decided to play the courteous host as best I could. I poured him a glass of port, and watched him observe its fire-flickered ruby depths. But while the logs in the hearth spat and crackled, I reflected upon the damn odd business we are in, dear friend. After all, we are priests of an increasingly practical church, and one which does not believe in the supernatural in these modern days, and perhaps has never believed. Dark Age superstition! That is what the bishop told me. Dark Age superstition! And to an extent I do agree with him. Allow the rustics outside the vicarage door to cherish their witch bottles or the dripping heart of a calf impaled with thorns, for the general world has moved on, and the devil must make do with a knee-patched congregation should he wish to hold an infernal mass on Sabin's Hill, as of yore. The folks in our pews are still ignorant. They are childish souls, my dear old friend, and they blink in the light of a progress which they can never comprehend. The great machines are coming to their fields, and then? What then? What shall be the purpose of the peasant? Can we blame them truly if they cling to arcane rituals? Can you condemn them, or I, or the bishop, yes, even the Right Reverend with his superior sneer and his measuring little eyes like two black marbles? I ask you, can we blame the rural poor for seeking power when they have none? The rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate, and so on ad infinitum. But why must the wretched endure their wretchedness if they are slighted or humiliated by their superiors? What recourse shall they have? The bishop is confident of forelocks being tugged as he rides by in his shiny black carriage. God, it seems, may occasionally listen to prayers from those with Oxford accents, such as ourselves. This indeed is the basis of our profession. But the devil, old bargaining Beelzebub. I say the devil is a good listener, especially when he hears a country Burr making its supplications. For myself, I have no doubt that Eleanor Grove had the cocked ear of Satan. Her desire was the elimination of a love rival, for young girls often feel the keen pangs of jealousy. All it took was a request written on a scrap of lead 6 inches square. That is all it took for another young servant called Betty Northrop to wither in sickness and die from consumption. Then Eleanor might have been free to marry the groom, a personable young man called Elias Mortlake, and Eleanor's malice might well have remained undiscovered. However, the lady of the house, old Mrs. Altrincham of Withers Court, she was soon in possession of Eleanor's leaden curse, after a chimney sweep discovered it on a ledge in the main parlour chimney. Note the main parlour, only the finest room for Lucifer. But I digress. Mrs. Altrincham recognised Eleanor's scratchy handwriting, and she was dismissed. And this is where my misfortunes began. You see, Mrs. Altrincham asked me to call because she felt as if a baleful shadow had been laid upon her home. In particular, she was especially aggrieved that Eleanor's curse had been found in the parlour and not the servants' quarters. That would have been more acceptable, for servants and the devil should know their place. It was then at Withers Court that I first examined Eleanor's leaden curse, and the outcome left me perplexed. Even considering the pressure of hand it must take to engrave any clear message in lead, young Eleanor's hand was scratchy, childish, and difficult to discern. But there was more than spite and ignorance there. Somehow Eleanor had set down the names of actual demons. There was poor Becky's name, and this was surrounded by the spiteful princes of hell, or at least a feral gaggle of that diabolical crew. Yes, those names were familiar to me as one who has studied such matters, but they are to be found only in arcane chronicles, many of those on parchment and centuries old. Those names are not to be found in the Book of Common Prayer. I shall not give them here, for why encourage the damned and the damnable? But yes, Eleanor Grove was acquainted with the titles and tasks of demons. From whence came that knowledge in a girl who could barely scribble her own name? No more fruitless speculation. I did my duty at Withers Court. I blessed each and every room except for the closets, where at that old pile one may encounter irregrettable stinks. I did not enter there. But I was more than generous with my flask of holy water. I determined to be brisk in my boots, however, as a man in his prime, and soon enough the business was over, and it was time to leave. "Is it all done, then?" asked Mrs. Altrincham, somewhat curtly, as if I were her window cleaner and not the vicar. But her thanks were profound enough, and it is gratifying work, is it not, to be praised and respected for sprinkling and muttering with a practised solemn expression on one's face. And pleasant it was to be seated again on my tidy grey pony, and to experience the reassuring jog, jog, jog of a journey to one's own front door. It was midsummer, and the golden light of evening was lying side by side with lengthening shadows on the fields, and the flower meadows were yielding their subtle, bitter-sweet scents as I passed by. I realised how night would shortly be upon me, but as I had reached Martha's Cross with only a mile to complete, I was not unduly troubled by the lateness of the hour. What did disturb me was the apparition of Eleanor Grove. And I say apparition, for she seemed more spirit than flesh, being dressed in a yellowing tatter of a smock, with her white skin peeping through, a little here, and a little more there. I had heard disturbing tales of her fall since her dismissal, such as how she had sold herself to farming folk on market day at Hettringham, and how she had been caught stealing eggs at Beckett's farm. Her paleness, her condition, her squalor barely surprised me, therefore, but she gave me a jolt by grabbing my bridle with a quickness I could barely countenance, and thereby bringing me to a halt. All this transpired while my thoughts were in turmoil. How had she appeared so suddenly and so near? A moment ago the lane was empty as it wound its way between the hawthorn hedgerows and the foamy verges of cow parsley. Yes, she had materialised from nowhere in the manner of a phantom. But a hand upon my knee and her imploring whine made me certain that she was merely ailing flesh and blood, and that she was famished and afraid. Well, ghosts being damned may do well to be afraid, as outcasts from the Lord. But tell me, what ghost can feel the pangs of hunger? No. Eleanor Grove was still among the living. I was convinced of it, and as I studied her red-rimmed eyes, her matted black hair, and the encrusted sores upon her brow, I almost felt deep pity for the girl. I almost relented when she asked me to turn back to Withers Court, where I might beg for her to be forgiven, and where I might ask Mrs. Altringham to reinstate her, perhaps. "I don't need no pay from her," she told me, "only my bed and my victuals." As I say, pity is a curious enchantment. One moment it is potent and the next quite broken. When Eleanor Grove then suggested how I might lie with her for a sixpence, out of Christian charity, I responded with a single blow from my riding crop, which left her with a welt across her nose and her right cheek. I am most sorry for that, but not sorry that I rode on with a flick of my rein. She was weeping and howling on the verge among the cow parsley, but I still continued on my way, for she had tempted me, and I had triumphed. That night, it seemed, my conscience was suffering, for my dream was of Eleanor with her damaged face. Once more I gazed into her red-rimmed eyes, and I was about to apologise, as a Christian man should, but she turned her back and walked down the lane away from me. It was a curious floating motion she displayed, as if she were subject to the impudence of every breeze, and her yellowing smock was adrift about the contours of her comely, slender form. It was evening in my dream, and she walked towards the sunset which was bathing the verges and the hedgerows with a steady amber light, until they had no colours of their own. Then Eleanor was gone, as if she had simply stepped into the sun, which was sinking low on the horizon, beneath a band of fiery orange cloud. No more of fanciful dreams. Let me bring you, old friend, to the next day, when I was alerted by a single heavy knock upon my front door. This was curious, unexpected, for I was anticipating no significant visitor. I was up from my study and in the hallway before a servant might respond, for I confess to a baleful weight in my breast, as if I had a foreboding of ill tidings. The knock was for my attention, and mine alone. I felt it in my bones. And what did I discover when I opened the door? Well, no familiar face was there to greet me, but on the wrought iron doormat was another leaden curse, and this one bore my name, and around my name were the names of malice, formidable demons armed with their weapons of disease and misfortune. Although still troubled by my encounter with Eleanor and my subsequent dream of the girl, I was struck initially by the impudence of such a spiritual assault. After all, are we not ordained ministers of Christendom? Surely it would take more than a square of lead and malice to bring me down. I had no doubt, of course, that Eleanor Grove had paid me a visit. Perhaps she was still out there in the garden, hiding in a laurel bush to see my reaction. I determined to show no alarm, and so I laughed out loud. I forced my mirth. I laughed and I laughed like a bedlam fool, until I felt a dull thump in my chest, as if an invisible spirit had attacked me with its fist. It was then I tasted blood, the sudden liquid warmth and tang of salt, and so began my episode of coughing, and nightly sweats, and gnawing aches. It was so. The curse took its effect, and my days in this world were foreshortened. I am still coughing blood. My handkerchiefs are sodden and crimson, and Dr. Miles has advised me that I must consider the advice which was once given to poor John Keats, namely to seek the warmer climes of Italy, because I will not survive another bitter English winter. However, you know how Keats fared in Rome, dear friend. You understand the ghastly, inevitable outcome. I must confess the idea of being in the holy city at last is enough to give me joyous palpitations, and I would go gladly, but not like this. Not like this. No, I must remain. I must be stoical and trust to God's plan, for I know I may be cured, if I have faith. But how shall I have faith, when our own bishop does not believe in miracles, as I have inferred? Meanwhile I am troubled by nightmares. 2 nights after I received the leaden curse, I fancied in my sleep that the devil himself paid me a visit. He sat beside my bed and mopped my fevered brow, and there was tenderness in his ministrations. I should have been sorely afraid, but he was handsome of form, with a thin elegant moustache and sleek black hair. However, his eyes were most memorable, for they were grey and swimming with pain and compassion. He never tried to deceive me, even when he raised his cup of filth and lies and offered to make me whole again. He told me what it meant to sip from the ebony grail, and I was sorely tempted, for I do so want to live, dear friend, 10 years, 5 years, 3, even at the expense of my soul. But the angels must have intervened, for I awoke as the devil was raising me from my pillow, even as he urged me to drink, and drink deeply. My chamber was grey with mourning, and a wardrobe leaned towards me as if to overhear my mumbled confusions. The walls too would not keep still. Oaken panels rushed towards me and then retreated so far, I felt as if I were lying in a vast echoing sepulchre, where only my whimpers could be heard. I determined to shut my eyes and reflect upon my encounter with Lucifer, and once again I considered how we wronged the poor and ignorant in our charge. For we condemned them from the pulpit for making a barley poppet, or for dancing to drums and midnight fiddles to save the blighted orchards. Their lives, dear friend, are merely precarious, for a bad harvest can mean starvation, while they must endure every insult, every cruelty, and each privation, just to labour for their masters and earn their bread and board. I ask again, where is God in all this? I mean, where is God for them? No, I shall not condemn them for turning on occasions to another power, for making use of witchcraft. After all, what other power will hearken to the wretched? I myself am numbered among the wretched. These were my disturbing considerations, as I roused myself at last and prepared for the bishop's visit, for that was the very day when he would arrive. However, you already know the outcome of that particular episode, and by then I was more than half set on other courses. They would not require his blessing and compliance. That evening, after the bishop's carriage had trundled away over the crackling gravels of my drive, I summoned fat Mrs. Rickaby to my parlour. She is my cook, of course, but I had the intention of also making her my informant. You must comprehend she is the finest gossip in Penshaw, and her husband is the greatest soak. He is seldom out of the Beecham Arms. Between them they will know if a rabbit breaks wind on downside meadows. Rabbits, however, were not my prime concern. It was news of Eleanor Grove I desired, but in this I was both shocked and disappointed. In truth, what she told me set me coughing again, and I caught revulsion in her sly squinty eyes as my handkerchief was mightily stained with gore. She told me that Eleanor Grove had been found hanging above the stream at Binley at least 1 full week ago. She had been buried in unconsecrated ground at the expense of Binley parish. But how could this be? How the devil could this be? I had met with Eleanor apparently, talked with her, and I had struck her too, but that was several days after her apparent act of self-destruction. Might there have been a mistake? Were the folks at Binley certain it was Eleanor? For now, however, I must assume the worst. Still my handkerchief is to my lips. I gestured to Mrs. Rickaby to waddle from my parlour and leave me alone, if not in peace. My plans, my hopes, my salvation, all in tatters. For how does one apologise to a ghost? I had planned as a good Christian fellow to seek Eleanor's forgiveness, and also her assistance. Surely a leaden curse, though given, can also be taken back. But now I ask you, where were my prospects? And so I await a letter. Father John Newman was my father's friend at the university, and I hear he is well regarded by the Mother Church in Rome. I have written to him appertaining to these matters of body and soul, and I seek his instruction. They say he is a holy man, and possibly a saint, and I see you frown at this, for you will think I am corresponding for a miracle. No, dear friend, I merely await his reply, and therefore you must imagine me a singular figure in the parlour window, looking for the post that never comes. I notice how the leaves have fallen early this autumn, and those which remain are of a dull bronze, without the customary splendour of this season. You smile at my indolence, but what else should I do but watch the world grow old? Aside from this, I cough, dear friend. I cough, and I cough.